The year was 1893. A 12-year-old boy from Germany faced an unimaginable loss, both of his parents. As he was left to navigate life alone, he inherited a small fortune, but fate dealt him another cruel blow. While traveling, his entire inheritance was stolen. Yet, in the face of adversity, this young boy held on to one thing: an unrelenting passion for watches. This passion would later fuel the creation of the world's most prestigious watch brand, Rolex. Hans Wilsdorf, an orphan after the tragic death of his parents, had his world turned upside down. His relatives sold the family business and sent him off to a boarding school. It was here that Hans befriended a boy from Switzerland, who introduced him to the fascinating world of Swiss watchmaking. This encounter ignited a spark in Hans that would define his future. In 1900, at just 19 years old, Hans left Germany for Switzerland, a country renowned for its watchmaking heritage. In Switzerland, Hans secured a position at a watchmaking company called Kuehne Korten, where he was tasked with checking the accuracy of hundreds of watches. It was during this time that Hans developed an intense desire to create the most accurate, durable, and reliable watches. His passion was undeniable, but tragedy struck again in 1903 when he moved to London. The 3,300 German gold marks he inherited were stolen, leaving him with almost nothing. Despite this setback, Hans persevered. In London, he found work at another watchmaking company in their sales and marketing department. Over the next 2 years, Hans absorbed invaluable knowledge about manufacturing processes, sales strategies, and, most importantly, consumer behavior within the watchmaking industry. It became clear to Hans that the watch companies of the time were focused on ornate, decorative timepieces, while the real demand from consumers was for simple, accurate, and elegant watches. This realization sparked a fire within him to create a watch company of his own. However, Hans faced a significant hurdle: capital. He lacked the funds to start his own company. So, in a bold move, he brought his brother-in-law on board as a business partner, who provided the capital to kickstart the business. In 1905, Wilsdorf and Davis was born. The company realized that watches were essential for travelers, helping them stay on schedule with trains and buses. Therefore, their first product was a pocket watch designed specifically for travelers. The pocket watch was smaller in size, portable, and encased in high-quality leather, giving it a premium feel. The portfolio pocket watch became an instant hit. Though successful with pocket watches, Hans had bigger ambitions. He saw that wristwatches were destined to replace pocket watches in the future. However, wristwatches were met with resistance, as they were perceived as women's accessories. Determined to change this perception, Hans seized an opportunity he saw in the British market. He noticed that both men and women wore bracelets, and so he decided to introduce gold and silver wristwatches designed to look like bracelets. These watches were marketed as bracelet watches instead of wristwatches, effectively appealing to both genders. This strategy paid off, and Hans's watches gained significant popularity. In addition to his innovative products, Hans realized that most watches on the market were simply branded with the manufacturer's name. Hans wanted something more unique, a name that could easily fit on a dial and be pronounced in any language. After considering over 100 potential names, he settled on Rolex in 1908. The name was not only easy to pronounce, but also sounded pleasant in many languages, making it the perfect fit for his brand. Hans quickly trademarked Rolex, and the world would soon come to recognize it as the epitome of luxury. However, even as Hans's watches began gaining traction, the company faced significant challenges in terms of accuracy. Wristwatches were smaller than pocket watches, and their movements were intricate and difficult to perfect. Up until 1910, Hans had imported the movements for his watches from Switzerland, but he was determined to develop his own. He immersed himself in horology, meeting with watchmakers around the world, and soon became an expert in watch movements. In 1910, he succeeded in developing the world's first wristwatch movement that received the coveted chronometer certificate from Switzerland's official chronometer testing institute. This achievement solidified Rolex's reputation for precision and quality. As demand grew, Rolex expanded its reach to other European countries, and by 1914, Hans had established multiple offices and assembled a team of 60 talented individuals. However, just as things were looking bright, World War I struck, bringing everything to a halt. In an effort to fund the war, the British government imposed a 33% export duty on watches, which caused Rolex's prices to soar and its sales to plummet. The company was on the brink of collapse. In a bid to survive, Hans relocated his operations to Switzerland, where he renamed the company Rolex Watch Company Limited. He started afresh, rebuilding his business from the ground up. Despite the challenges posed by the war, Hans noticed an emerging trend: the demand for wristwatches from soldiers. In the trenches of World War I, soldiers needed a practical way to keep track of time. Pocket watches were cumbersome, requiring soldiers to remove them from their pockets to check the time, which was impractical during battle. Wristwatches, on the other hand, could be worn on the wrist, allowing soldiers to easily check the time without compromising their actions. Seeing this need, Hans launched the Rolex trench watch, designed specifically for soldiers. It featured unbreakable glass, a strong case, and luminescent radium hands to allow soldiers to tell time in low-light conditions. The Rolex trench watch was a huge success, and it helped the brand gain traction during a time of global turmoil. As soldiers returned home from the war, they brought with them a newfound appreciation for wristwatches, and soon, wristwatches became a symbol of modernity. Hans's prediction had come true. Wristwatches completely replaced pocket watches. Yet, despite the success of his trench watch, Hans faced another obstacle: the lack of protection for wristwatches against dust and water. Hans knew that in order to create the ultimate timepiece, he needed to solve this problem. Most watches at the time were constructed using a snap-on mechanism, which left gaps that allowed dust and water to seep in. Hans and his team at Rolex came up with a groundbreaking solution: a screw-on case that tightly sealed the watch using grooves and rubber rings. This design allowed the watch to remain waterproof and dustproof, much like an oyster. The result was the Rolex Oyster, launched in 1926, and it became known as the world's first waterproof watch. The Oyster needed an innovative marketing campaign to match its revolutionary design. Hans saw an opportunity in Mercedes Gleitze, a British swimmer who was attempting to cross the English Channel. Hans offered her a Rolex Oyster to wear during her swim, with the idea that the watch would prove its waterproof capabilities. Though Gleitze didn't complete the swim, the Rolex Oyster performed flawlessly, and the watch's reputation for being waterproof was solidified. Hans used this success in advertising, featuring Mercedes alongside the Rolex Oyster in promotional materials. By 1928, Rolex had established itself as a leader in the luxury watch market. Hans continued to push the boundaries of watchmaking, and in 1931, he introduced the Rolex Oyster Perpetual, the world's first self-winding wristwatch. This innovative design used a rotor to wind the mainspring as the wearer's wrist moved, eliminating the need for manual winding. The Rolex Oyster Perpetual set a new standard in the industry, cementing Rolex's place as the king of watchmaking. However, World War II once again disrupted Rolex's operations. The war caused a global supply chain crisis, and Rolex's sales plummeted. Yet, Hans Wilsdorf's resilience allowed the company to survive, and in 1945, Rolex celebrated its 40th anniversary with the launch of the Rolex Datejust, the world's first automatic watch with a date display. Rolex continued to innovate throughout the 1950s and 1960s. The company introduced models such as the Rolex Explorer, designed for mountaineers, and the GMT Master, made specifically for pilots who needed to track multiple time zones. In 1960, Rolex launched the Deep Sea Special, an experimental watch that could withstand the extreme water pressure at the deepest point in the ocean. Rolex's reputation continued to grow, and by the time Hans Wilsdorf passed away in 1960, the company had firmly established itself as a symbol of luxury, precision, and innovation. Rolex watches were seen as more than just timepieces. They were a symbol of success, status, and achievement. Today, Rolex is recognized worldwide as the premier brand in luxury watches, with a legacy that spans over a century. This is the story of Hans Wilsdorf, the man who turned his passion for watches into the creation of the world's greatest watch company, Rolex.